the cool thing about doing this podcast is that I sort of get to talk about whatever I like. And a lot of the things that I like don't have the biggest audience in the world, but that's the cool thing about having a podcast. It's not like radio. You'll sort of find your dedicated audience, and one of the things that I really love is a band called Jellyfish. I'm a huge fan. So it's a pleasure to have the author of the new upcoming Jellyfish book, Brighter Day, a Jellyfish story, Craig Dorfman. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Getting over a chest cold, but otherwise feeling, I feel good, strong, really excited that that the book is sort of a thing now.
Absolutely. So, are you living in California at the moment, or I just kind of assume that it's Jellyfish related, so you're probably out in LA.
Yeah, that would be a fair assumption, but wrong. I live in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, yes, you do, don't you? So the weather's not exactly the hottest, I would assume. That's why you've got the cold. Okay.
Yeah, it's been raining here for like 6 weeks.
Okay, right. Okay, really. So, do you live up in the hills? Because that's what I kind of associate with Portland. Sort of, big mountains and.
Yeah. Well, I live in the city, but we're surrounded by the big hills and big trees and mountains. And Oregon is a pretty geographically diverse state, so it's kind of an hour to beach or mountains or desert or river valley or whatever. It's really it's a good place to be if you like the outdoors.
I would love to get out there sometime. Okay, well let's get straight into business. Brighter Day, the Jellyfish story. This is a project that has been sort of underworks for how long now?
Well, I mean, it depends on where you want to call it started. I think in its current form, it's been about 5 years. In any form, it's been about 7.
Wow.
The book initially started as a pitch to the 33 and a third book series, which is a series where writers write a book on one album, and the idea is to approach the album in some sort of unique or interesting or kind of fascinating way. And I had pitched a book on spilt milk, and the pitch went very far in the process. It made a few different cuts, and throughout I was keeping Roger and Bruce Burdine at Not Lame Records up to date on the progress of the book, because I had been telling them, that if it went through, I was going to count on them for a lot of help. And we missed the last cut, and so I called Roger and Bruce and said, it's a no-go. And Bruce said, well, if you're interested, Not Lame will publish the book. And so I said, I'm interested. And then we didn't really talk about it again for a year and a half. And that was the spring of 2011.
And around probably that time, that's when Not Lame sort of closed up shop.
Right.
So again, that was probably a bit of a roadblock for release of the book. Or did he come to you straight away with the plans for Popkey Kevin?
Yeah, he knew what he was. He knew he had an exit strategy for Not Lame, and knew that Popkey Kevin was going to start up. Mm-hmm. So on my end, I didn't feel any bumps. He just said, I'm closing the label, and I've got a really cool idea for something else in the works.
So when you got the go-ahead from Not Lame, or when you were told of Bruce's plans for Not Lame, for Popkey Kevin, at what point did you decide to go this route with the book to give a full history of the band? Because did you realize what an undertaking that would be at the time?
Right. That's a good question. I decided right away that it should be a full history of the band, because even the 33 and a third pitch was more of a history of the band than it was, focused on spilt milk. I just kind of needed to pick one of the two records to build the story around.
Got you.
So in some ways, this is the book I wanted to do anyway.
Yeah.
As far as the size of undertaking, I think in some ways I thought it would be it was going to be a lot more work than I ended up doing, or needing to do. And in some ways I thought it would be a lot easier than it has turned out to be.
Is that because the band were far more accessible than you thought?
That was part of it. The band has been great and really,
Including Andy?
including Andy.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
Andy's
kind of
been.
like the common sort of, I can't believe Andy took part in this.
Yeah, that certainly was the big surprise. Andy actually uh, got in touch with me.
Oh, okay.
Um, I mean, I had been pursuing him through several different channels and acquaintances,
Uh,
and I think he, eventually sort of figured out that I wasn't going to stop, and so he called me at my house. And I remember this is super clearly. It was going on 10 o'clock at night, and I was getting ready for bed, and my wife answered the phone, and she said, like, "Hi, yeah, he's right here. Can I ask who's calling?"
uh,
And then her eyes kind of got wide. She covered the mouthpiece of the phone and just whispered, "He says it's Andy." And we kind of looked at each other like, "What?" And so I got on the phone, and he said, "Hi, it's Andy Sturmer." Which to me at that point felt a little bit like, "Hi, this is a unicorn. I was hoping to talk," you know.
yeah.
Um, but he's been great, really accessible and honest and helpful and warm and forthright. Um, I'm really lucky, I guess, to have his cooperation.
Well, that's really great to hear. Okay. Well, let's go sort of back in time. Where
Sure.
did you discover Jellyfish?
Uh, it's funny. I've been thinking lately. I can't figure out which of these two things happened first. But when I went to college, an a cappella group there did "Glutton of Sympathy,"
Oh well. Okay.
and and I remember, I had a good friend in the group, and I said, like, "Who does that song? That's a great song. Who does that?" And he said, "Jellyfish," and I was like, "All right." I made a mental note
Mhm.
to check them out, and either not long before that or not long after that, I was in another friend's car, and "The King Is Half Undressed" was playing, and I was like, "This is great. Who is this?" And he said, "This is it's Jellyfish."
Uh,
And I was like, I guess I got to check these guys out. Like they kind of they're telling me something here. Um, so
so the whole belly button thing with all the videos on MTV that just completely sort of passed you by, sort of thing.
yeah, it did, and I was right in that key demographic. I was in high school when Belly Button came out,
Uh,
and totally into sort of buzzbin alternative nation kind of bands.
uh,
So I think I must have heard of them or seen them. That I can't imagine those were my first brushes with Jellyfish, but definitely the first time I started paying attention was right when I started college.
right. So did you get a chance to see them live?
I never saw them live.
Okay. So at what point was it a sort of a gradual thing where they became, one of your favorite bands to the point where you would want to sort of write an entire history on the band?
Um, hmm. Yeah, it definitely was a gradual thing. I think the record sort of grew on me,
Uh,
uh, and really, what drew me to writing the book was less, um, you know, a, an intense love of the music, although I did, and still do love the music, and more a fascination with the story. Um, I think there are a lot of great bands out there, but not all of them would sort of hook me as a writer.
uh,
Um, but what was neat about Jellyfish, and I guess still is, at least for the time being, and I'm sure is that if you sort of poke around online, it's sort of like an echo chamber. There's the same version of the story just kind of clanging around, and it pops up all over the place.
yeah.
And it's like a decent Wikipedia entry essentially. And so as much as I knew was that we had these two guys who were friends in high school, and then were in a band that they eventually sort of broke out of and made a record, toured the world, made another record, toured the world, and then haven't spoken since.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating to me. Like, what happened? What does that friendship look like? Assuming that the band is sort of a manifestation of that friendship, I was really interested in how that relationship sort of evolved and formed, um, and how it faded away. They didn't break up hostily or acrimoniously. They just decided to never work together again
Yeah.
or talk to each other.
Well, you started writing the book 7 years ago. So obviously Jellyfish has never really left, the consciousness of, power pop fans or anything, but you wrote it at a time before, I mean, okay, the Not Lame box set had come out, but it's before all of these omnivore releases and everything else. So,
Hmm.
did you sort of think the audience would be there at the time, or has like confidence grown over time when you've seen these, limited edition pressings sell out and all that
Yeah.
kind of thing?
Um, the confidence has kind of gone up and down. Definitely, the reason I reached out to Bruce when I first pitched the project was because of the box set,
Uh,
and in that initial pitch to 33 and a third, part of that pitch had to be sort of convincing them that there was a market for the book.
yeah,
And so I had asked Bruce how many copies of the box set he sold, and it was 8,000. And he sold out pretty quickly.
wow,
And so, I knew that there were at least 8,000 people out there who were pretty interested.
yeah.
Uh,
I didn't know it was that many.
I didn't either, actually. I was sort of pleasantly surprised.
Mhm.
Um, so I knew that there was enough of a market to make it worth my while.
Uh,
Um, and uh, yeah, and then certainly the omnivore reissues have made it more exciting. And I think the last chapter of the book is really a discussion of or a summary of Jellyfish's legacy.
mhm.
How the music has lived after the end of the band, and having the omnivore reissues to build on really helps. Sort of, it makes that discussion more tangible.
Yeah,
And works a lot better than saying like, oh, there are lots of bands who say they like Jellyfish, which is good and important, but um, it doesn't make a whole chapter of a book.
no, absolutely. And also Ken Sharp with his power pop books as well. He has a big feature on Jellyfish coming out as well. So
Right.
it's a pretty good time. It's a great time to be a Jellyfish fan.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Um, especially I mean I got into Jellyfish around 2000 and I'm going to say 2007. So it was quite late. It was Roger's first album.
Uh-huh.
Um, it was my boss at work. He was a big Jellyfish fan. I'd never heard of them at all,
Uh-huh.
and he got in the Land of Pure Imagination and the LEO album.
Uh-huh.
And he said he was quite honest that he bought it for the two lines that Andy Sturmer sang on Goodbye Innocence, and I was like, why the hell would you? Because it was import charges as well, so it was really
Right.
expensive, and it was Wish It Would Rain off Roger's album.
Uh-huh.
That just knocked down all of the doors for me, all of the creative sort of walls,
Huh.
and really did sort of change my life from then. And the fact that I'm a insane collector. I mean, the fact that I had a student loan kind of helped. Yeah, kind of, waste. Well, I'm not going to say wasted, because it's come in handy for when for projects and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
yeah, that's that's kind of what happened. That's kind of my sort of background with that. It was actually the time when the Jellyfish tribute album was being made,
Oh yeah. Right.
and we were my band at the time. I was the only person who was really into Jellyfish in the band, so
Uh-huh.
I was going to be on one of the bonus tracks. I think it was going to be a long time ago,
Uh-huh.
but the band just weren't into it. If it was now, it I would have probably stood a better chance of being on it. But
Hmm. Hmm.
yes. So when did you have to sort of get the consent of every band member before you felt confident enough to go forward with this?
Uh, well,
To
I
tell
don't remember.
the full story, sort of thing.
Right. I intended to talk to everybody.
Hmm.
Um, and I think when I first started, it was, I was kind of taking steps gingerly,
Uh-huh.
um, because I didn't know who would or wouldn't participate, and I certainly had my suspicions, um, and I wasn't sure what I would get from each person, and so it was, always I felt ideally I would talk to all of them, and then if I couldn't, I would sort of assess as I went to see if I felt like I could tell a fair story.
Uh-huh. So is it, without going too much into the book, is it interview based, or is it like sort of chapters written with like sort of pieces of the band's interviews sort of interlaced into that? Or
Neither, actually.
oh, okay.
I it reads, or I've tried to make it read just sort of like a story.
Okay.
And so what I did was I interviewed, you know, lots of people, and then tried to internalize all of what they had told me, and then spit it back out
Mm.
into a kind of unified, like, master narrative. Um, and uh, and that was a really deliberate choice, versus, say, an oral history or something like that. Um, and they're kind of, I guess, there's several reasons there. Two of them are, I think, are key, and one is, I really, really didn't want to get into like a he said, or
Yeah, totally.
kind of thing where, um, somebody lets the wrong words slip or whatever, and then it just feels like more kind of, fighting or frustration just playing out in the page of the book. I didn't really want to do that.
Mm.
And then because Andy had been so quiet, or has been so quiet for so long, um, I wanted his side of the story to kind of get equal weight. Um, that we've heard a lot from a lot of the other guys, and I think that could predispose somebody to either give their version of the story extra weight, or give it less weight because Andy's been so quiet. So I really just wanted sort of everything to knit together to see if I couldn't kind of balance perspectives, and uh, put out something that was kind of fair and supportive of everybody.
Mm. A while ago, the only person I've really sort of talked to a little bit about the book was Eric Dover, because we've worked together on a couple of projects, and
Right.
um, from what I've been told, it's a bit of a sort of balls to the wall, you know, very honest sort of thing that might not disillusion the fans, but like make them realize that the band are never getting back together.
Uh, yeah.
I see. Obviously, I don't want you to give too much away, but and that is just something that I'd heard as well. So that's what I kind of assumed, that I didn't think it was going to be just a big bitching session, but it would serve as a platform for people to be honest.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anything contradicts anything else in the book or anything like that. But I mean, did the band? I'm assuming the band have sort of fact checked it or anything like that, or
They're in the process now. Roger and Andy are reading over drafts of it right now, and
okay.
Jason and Tim will get little pieces, um, to take a look at about themselves, but largely Roger and Andy, and then some other kind of outside people who were nearby at the time.
Uh-huh. So I mean, would you say that once we've read the book, that it will sort of confirm that the band, there's no bad blood, but that they probably won't do anything together again?
Uh,
Or is that something you don't want to sort of spoil?
it's not so much something I don't want to spoil as much as something I don't want to speculate on. I think,
Okay, okay.
one of like what I can say is that when Jellyfish was a band,
Uh,
they were young, they were kids, and they're grown-ups now. And so what they, certainly uh, if I was a betting man, I wouldn't put money on them getting back together.
uh,
But I also am not in the camp of, it's never going to happen, because ultimately it's not, in a funny way, like it's not up to me. Um,
yeah.
and and I know that the 25-year-olds that split up the band wouldn't wouldn't be getting it back together, but they're not, those guys don't exist anymore. And it's really up to the 40 somethings now to figure out what they want to do.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that was probably a bad question to ask because it's kind of an impossible sort of definite answer to give.
Sure.
Um,
I mean, I appreciate you asking. It's definitely the three
it's
big.
something that I talk to with just about every Jellyfish fan that I think.
Right. I mean, that's the big question, really, and it's the one I get probably most often. And I think I give the kind of answer that if I was the asker of the question, I would be sort of frustrated to hear, this little bit slippery, like, well, I don't know, it's not up to me, like, um, and I feel like that's the fairest and most honest uh, thing I can do. And in a funny way, no, I think I'll just stop there.
Okay, okay, yeah, I don't want to get anyone in any kind of trouble. Um, to the sort of intriguing chapters from the list were that you've went through the Manning and Sturmer family tree.
Yeah,
So were there any sort of revelations or in terms
yeah. Uh,
anything that you can share that again without giving too much away?
yeah, those were fascinating. So again, because I was kind of coming at the book from this point angle of trying to figure out the relationship and the kind of characters involved,
Uh,
it was really important to me to figure out who they were and where they had come from. And both of them have really kind of cool life stories. Andy's family story is phenomenal. It's really really fascinating, and it probably deserves a book of its own. In
okay,
fact, I might even say in that chapter, like that this really deserves a book of its own. Uh, his paternal grandparents
mm,
were in Russia uh, at the time of the Russian Revolution,
wow,
and um, it was, it was a crazy crazy time. And then they ended up in the Philippines, and shortly after that, the Philippines went to war.
hmm,
Um, and then they ended up in Alaska and then California. Um, and just the stuff that they saw and went through and kind of had to go through in order to get from Tsarist Russia to 1950s California was a heck of a journey.
I can imagine. So I mean, because he wrote "The Man I Used to Be," and
Yeah.
like in your opinion, is that sort of connected to his family history then? Because I kind of assumed that it probably was.
Hmm.
But do you think that kind of confirms anything with that sort of?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think um, on one hand, I think no. Andy, the way Andy described lyric writing to me is that he sort of free associates. He's got a melody
Mhm.
and it kind of hums, and then a few syllables kind of spill out, and then those turn into words, and eventually there's enough of a skeleton that he can sort of string it together to make something unified.
Okay.
Uh, uh, and as we both know, his lyrics are really smart and very powerful, and so there's a way that they do form pretty clear uh, messages. And I would think that. having a family history of guys in the Navy, basically, would be clanging around in his head, and it's not crazy to think that it would come out in the form of these lyrics. But I feel pretty confident saying he didn't sit down to write that.
Okay. So, during these interviews, was there sort of any revelations, band revelations that sort of completely blew your mind?
Um, Very few, about the band itself, about Jellyfish, 1990 to 94.
Uh,
Um, it's a lot of small things. There are lots of stories that I found kind of interesting and surprising in the way that like a joke is surprising. I was kind of like, oh, I didn't see that coming.
mhm.
Um, but I think the big sort of reveals to me were in things kind of surrounding the story, um, or surrounding the band. And I think the biggest, uh, I think, or the one that's been the most rewarding for me is um, the the way folks tell the Beatnik Beach story, or the way I always read the Beatnik Beach story,
Uh,
was that Andy and Roger were in this band, that was, essentially led by Chris Kettner,
yeah.
uh, and they were writing these songs, and Kettner didn't want them to, or didn't want to play their songs,
Mhm.
uh, and that's nearly the opposite of what happened. Uh, Kettner was in fact very, very, very supportive of both of them, and was kind of thrilled with their writing, and they both really looked up to him and still look up to him now, and uh, so it's a real shame that over the last 20 years, Chris Kettner has been seen as sort of a villain in the story.
Yeah,
Uh,
that is a bit of a revelation. That's something that I wouldn't have put money on myself. Just
yeah, I
because
mean,
if you hear it enough times on the internet, then it kind of becomes true.
right, right, and just the deeper I dug into it, the more I found like it didn't look anything like that.
Uh,
Um, yeah, Kettner was a a really talented, very, very caring, thoughtful mentor to both of them, and they still see him that way.
uh,
They're very fond of him, and he's a terrific guy. And so one of the things I'm really happy about is to be able to like put that out there and sort of clear his name a little bit publicly, and set that record straighter.
so I'm guessing you got to talk to Chris and George
I,
Cole and
I
the entire
did, yeah,
band. Yeah, wow, that's pretty good. So, you know, I know just by reading the blurb on the book that it's pretty in depth. So, I'd imagine that everyone that I could possibly think of, Lyle Workman and
yeah,
Shalom,
yep.
just is, was there anyone that you couldn't get who was
Yeah, yeah, there were a couple people I couldn't get. There are a couple who I'm still kind of holding out hope that, um, the book is still, the nice thing about publishing small is that it's a pretty nimble process. And so,
Mhm.
um, I'm still kind of tweaking it and polishing it and stuff now. So, there are still people that I'm kind of chasing in hopes that I can get them. Um, I think one guy who I would have loved to talk to, and I think it's a safe bet that I won't, is a guy named Phil Cordero,
Okay.
who was president of Charisma at the time, and is just sort of a giant in the music business. I mean, uh, he's got several layers of people to keep people like me from getting to him. Uh,
Okay.
but Phil Q was a big, big believer in Jellyfish and a big fan of theirs, and is a big part of the reason why they were able to make the records that they did. They had terrific financial support from Charisma while they were recording, and a lot of that was due to Phil's faith in their talents. So I would have loved to hear his reflections now.
Mm. Well,
Um,
I can't imagine that Andy and Roger would have had a bad word to say, considering Charisma, like you say, put in so much money into the band, and when you look at not just the recordings of Spilt Milk and Belly Button, you look at all the promotional items as well. That's
yeah.
where how my collection personally has gotten so ridiculous.
Hmm.
That you wouldn't see that for some bigger bands. Never mind, a band that didn't really sort of, sell the amount of records, but the band lends itself perfectly to merchandise and fun items and all
Hmm.
that kind of thing. So I mean, I, again, I don't know about this, but did Andy and Roger have a hand in the creative side with the milk carton and all that kind of thing?
They did. They had some hand in it. To be honest, we haven't gotten into tremendous depth over that. But I know that they were their manager, who's a guy named Chris Coyle,
Uh,
uh, is a terrific businessman, and was less concerned with things like pants and hats and milk cartons.
okay.
Um, and so Andy and Roger were had their hands on that a lot, which is great, especially for someone like Roger, who really had this idea of an image that he um, wanted to project. And so it was kind of great that they didn't have the sort of manager who was putting his fingerprints on everything.
Mhm. Well, was there ever because like I say, the money really got invested into the products, but the gigs were
Hmm.
kind of small and looked like they didn't. I mean, they didn't need the money invested in them because the talent outshone anything that you could have put on that stage. But was there any frustration in the fact that the gigs, usually, looking at all of the bootlegs that have happened, was there any frustration from the band that there wasn't the money put in to maybe advertising the gigs or into the stage presentation or anything like that?
I think different at different times there were different levels of um, frustration. So I know they went to Australia as part of the Spilt Milk promotion, and
Mm.
that was a pretty undersold tour. Um, and I know they were really frustrated about that they had sort of traveled
I,
halfway around the world to play to 200 people in the middle of nowhere.
oh, okay.
Um, um,
I can hear a dog.
yeah, there's a dog and there's a child who are both sort of futzing around back here.
Okay.
Um, so the Australian tour, I think, was somewhat disappointing, uh, and I think in general the Spilt Milk tour wasn't consistently sold. Didn't sell tickets as much as I think anybody would have liked to see.
Hmm.
Or not everywhere. In Europe they were very big, in Japan they were very big, and in the U.S. they did respectably, but not phenomenally, especially in light of the music of the time. There was no way for anybody to fit them into the kind of schema of radio at that point.
Yeah, well, I was going to say as well, the US is quite a big and diverse place, so not everywhere would probably take to a band like Jellyfish. I'd read stories that, the first lineup in particular would go on stage in a bar or something like that, and they would just get stuff thrown at them, and, because they were dressed as they were, and
Hmm.
they were probably perceived as a bit of a joke. But obviously, once the music began, um, so, I mean, were there any sort of stories that are in the book or not in the book about really bad sort of experiences like that?
Nothing like that, of them being sort of, um, dreadfully received. Uh, and there's one on the flip side, which is when they started with the Black Crows. Um, the Crows at the time were a huge,
Uh-huh.
just a tremendous band, and still pretty new. So they had this kind of explosive, young Southern rock and roll bad boys kind of image,
Okay.
and uh, and they had just gotten kicked off of a tour. Actually, the Crows had,
Hmm.
and kind of you know said like, well, we'll just headline now, and so Jellyfish got the opening slot, and the folks at Charisma kind of sat down with the band. And they said, "Listen, like these guys are, this is like a Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin kind of tour you're going on here. Like these guys do not kid around in terms of like the rock and roll lifestyle."
Uh,
Uh, so the tour kicked off in Florida, and and I think they were, kind of worried that they were going to be in the South with, facing a legion of Black Crowes fans who might not get them and really might not appreciate them.
yeah.
And uh, and the Crowes fans loved them. They were really, really well received and welcomed, and that went well. But I think that uh, those first couple nights on that tour, I think they were worried about dodging tomatoes.
Hmm. Well, I'm sure there's a bootleg somewhere of Andy on stage playing drums um, while the Black Crows are performing their set. Um,
Yeah, and
it's somewhere on the internet somewhere, probably on YouTube.
um, there's a little bit you can catch of the four of them occasionally would come sing backup for the Crows,
Right.
and there's a clip of that somewhere I know I've
I
seen.
think that's what I'm thinking of as well because I do remember hearing Andy's voice on that. So, there are sort of little things, and these are things that I've asked Roger about as well, and he can't. Well, he said that he couldn't recollect, so I don't know if that means that he just didn't want to give me an answer on them. But I would just love to know if the topic, how covered the topic of music videos was in the book. In particular, the fact that certain singles, like "I Want to Stay Home," didn't get a music video.
Hmm.
Was that talked about? I mean, was the frustration that they couldn't really promote some of these singles?
Uh, no, I mean at that point they were already three singles deep into the record, and I think there was kind of some sense, almost a sense of confusion about whether they were going to stop at three or try and milk another single out of the record. And
Uh,
so at that point, I don't know that anybody had this very clear like sense of no, we want to get more out of Belly Button and we're not.
hmm.
Um, but I also don't know that there's a clear sense of like I don't know why we're releasing this single.
Got it. I mean, it wasn't even like "I Want to Stay Home" was just released, just rush released because it got the 3D glasses and
Right.
the pop-up sleeve and everything. It's just crazy the surplus cash that must have been sort of hanging around in the music industry in the early 90s.
Hmm.
Yeah, and well, the specific video that Andy talked about after his Wembley set when they supported In Excess
Hmm.
was that they were going to record a music video for "Now She Knows She's Wrong,"
Hmm.
and it was going to be at Norwich, the waterfront. So it kind of gave me the impression that it was going to be a live style video because it's kind of a hard video to sort of have or a hard song to have a storyline for.
Hmm.
And Justin Hawkins out of the Darkness said that he was in the audience for that. But I asked Roger about the video and he said he had no recollection. So that could be a thing that could ideally, if it was recorded, see the light of day at some point. But
Um, it could be, the Wembley gig is on video somewhere. The BBC broadcast that
yes,
show.
well, the
So
audio's pretty. Well, I mean, the audio's on the box set, isn't it? But I think it was sped up a little bit, maybe to fit it all on the CD. Um,
uh, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That's a great question.
I think I'll have to ask Bruce about that.
But that video I think would be a sort of holy grail
Oh, totally. Well, I mean,
moment.
the video must exist because the NXS gig did get released on video.
Right. Uh,
Um,
yeah, I'm sure it's out there, and I'm sure it's in good quality. But I think, well, out there is maybe not the best way to put it. Like, I think it's probably in a vault somewhere, uh, or got taped over by now. A lot of times at that point there wasn't a sense of there being an internet for everything to live on forever, and so lots of kind of cool stuff ended up getting taped over just
that's
in an
true.
effort to save tape.
Yeah, old Top of the Pops episodes
Right.
used to just get completely wiped, and they had the Beatles and early Queen performances and David Bowie and stuff that just got lost. And actually, with the Queen performances, some of them were rediscovered at the end of this guy called Max Bygraves. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
Okay, well, when he passed away, he used to record everything off TV, like everything. And I don't know if someone won his videos in an auction or if they were handed down to someone, but uh, people were going through every video, and at the end of it was some terrible sitcom. There was an episode of Top of the Pops after it, and it was a wiped episode of Top of the Pops, and this long lost Queen, because I'm a huge Queen fan. Um, these long lost performances were found, and that's really cool. So it's kind of there's probably people out there who loved Jellyfish back then and have stuff just on tape that they've not uploaded to YouTube yet, because stuff seems to get uploaded every so often, like crazy stuff, like I'm sure you've seen it, like the raw footage of babies coming back in front of the blue screen, and
Hmm.
it's just I would love to know who has that stuff to upload.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Be great.
it's pretty amazing. So, um, I'm assuming everyone will probably want to know. So, is Andy in good health?
Yeah, Andy is doing well. He lives in Southern California. He with his family, he's doing he's got a good gig with the cartoons.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and in lots of ways, he's very lucky, in that he's doing something that he's good at and that he likes. He can write songs and uh, have them played, and he doesn't have to go through the trouble of touring and being sick and talking to interviewers and whatnot. So he's kind of carved out a pretty good life for himself.
That's cool. Because I mean, I think one of the uh, what people just assume about Andy is that he's not much of a people person. Because obviously, there's not even a photograph
Right.
of him online. So I mean, did he go into that at all? Why that is how it is? Was it a conscious thing to just really back away from everything, or because like did he say as well why he doesn't really sing on too much, or is that just a
I think he doesn't sing because it doesn't sort of come up that much.
okay?
Um, and in the work that he's doing.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think one of the things he said to me in our first conversation was, he was like, I'm just a guy now,
Uh-huh.
and I have my job and my family, and uh, and in the context he was saying, like, and now you're calling and saying you want to write my life down and publish it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think part of the reason he's laid low is he just doesn't really imagine himself the kind of person who would. I guess, like, we could say, um, how come there aren't pictures of my dad on the internet in the last 20 years?
Oh,
It's
okay,
just that,
I
like,
get
my
you.
dad is not the kind of guy who lives a life that anybody would be interested in pictures of. And while there are plenty of people interested in the pictures of Andy, he's not living the kind of life that sort of lends itself to that.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I'm totally sort of, as a fan, fine, because it's obviously not my, say to tell Andy Stomer what to do. But I'm totally fine with the fact that he chooses to not do that, or he doesn't feel that it's relevant to have a picture of himself online or anything like that. But I do speak to the odd person who is sort of quite frustrated at that fact. But I think I'm assuming that Andy realizes that he has everyone still loves Jellyfish, but I mean, does he just consider it just a small part of what he once did, sort of thing?
I think he considers it a large part of what he once did,
Okay.
but it's not what he is doing now. It's a thing that happened and is over,
Yeah.
um, and maybe there will come a time when it makes sense for it to not be over anymore. But for now, it's kind of not. Like I guess I tend to see Jellyfish as this thing that got stopped and before it was supposed to stop,
Yeah.
and that's not his sense. I think he really feels like it stopped,
Yeah.
and then his life went on, and that's that. Like that it doesn't. He doesn't have the he doesn't see it from the same place that I do or we do, where it's this kind of thing outside of ourselves that we saw a particular arc of.
Mm.
That he sees a different arc, I guess, when he looks at Jellyfish.
With the rest of the band, as well as Andy as well, were they sort of surprised in this kind of resurgence of interest, or did they sort of allude to that at all?
Um, a little bit. They mostly no. I think certainly, Tim and Eric for sure had this appreciation of Jellyfish as this um uh like they had an appreciation for Jellyfish's kind of grandiosity,
Uh-huh.
and um and so I think they are kind of happy that it's getting its due.
Mm-hmm.
And I think surprised in the sense that lots of things that are really good just disappear over time, and I think they're kind of surprised like that um that maybe something, the right thing is happening here, that they're not going to kind of go down, uh, they're not going to fade into obscurity quite so. Um, and I think, Chris Manning feels similarly. Um, and Jason, yeah, I mean, I think they all certainly appreciate that the music they made was special
Yeah.
and more than just a couple of records that, a band banged out. And so the the resurgence is a pleasant surprise, is my sense, that they sort of feel like it's nice to continue to be appreciated and to maybe um, like with the perspective of time to feel like they're appreciated um, a little bit more. That as other stuff has fallen away, they remain.
Mm. Well, yeah, I've had the good sort of fortune to work with members of the band and be in contact with probably all of them except Andy. And I realized that I think when I say Jellyfish, I kind of use it as a blanket sort of term to cover Imperial Drag, Uma Jets, Jason Faulkner's solo stuff. That it's probably an unfair thing to do that, but it's kind of an easy thing
Mm-hmm.
to do, sort of thing. So I've realised that I have to sort of I think other fans that sort of contact them as well realise that it's far too easy to just fanboy out, sort of thing, and probably freak them out, sort of thing, and have them then just not choose to reply, because I get the feeling that some of the band don't really like the whole social media
Mm-hmm.
side of things. So did you obviously you'll I'm assuming you came across in a completely professional manner, but did you get the chance to ask any completely sort of fan related questions that you really wanted to just
Uh,
know, just to satisfy your own curiosity?
Mm, yeah, I had the chance a couple times with Jason. You know, as I am a big fan of Jason's solo work,
Yeah.
and there were a couple times where he would sort of tell a story, and I'd be like, "Oh, is that what led to this song or that song?" And I was right about half the time, I would say. Um, and uh, I play drums not especially well, but I play them, and so Andy and I have sort of talked drum gear a little bit, and um,
Cool. So Andy still plays.
yeah,
That's good
yeah.
to know. That's cool.
Um, so yeah, I did have some kind of fan moments. I had funny fan moments with people. Um, well, so I had a couple, I think, with people who were not in Jellyfish. So I got to talk to Buddy Judge from the Grays,
Oh,
and
yes, that's cool.
and and I just love Buddy's songs. I love his solo record. I love his stuff on the Grays. Um, and so that was this kind of funny fanboy moment, that I got all excited talking to Buddy Judge.
Yeah.
And I did my best to just sort of be upfront about that because I didn't um, want to sort of try and be smooth and when I'm clearly not.
Well, they
Uh,
must assume, that you are obviously a hardcore fan if you're prepared to write a book.
yeah.
You know,
But mostly with the Jellyfish guys, I um, tried to keep in order to get the story that I wanted,
yeah.
or the level of story I wanted. I really wanted them to feel like I was trustworthy, and a big part of that was not um, not giving them the sense that I was in any way sort of giddy about it.
Okay.
Um, and that said, like it's still a giddy moment to me when I get a call or a text from one of them, and my phone says Roger Manning, or I get a text from Jason Faulkner. I still feel like, holy cow, I just got a text from Jason Faulkner.
Yeah.
Uh, but mostly, I think I used the access I had um, as a writer, and then just the fact of the access was the sort of fan uh, goose that I got.
Okay. So, okay, just a few questions just to finish off. Firstly, did you get to speak to John Bryan?
I did not get to speak to John Bryan. He's probably second on the list of
Okay.
big fish I didn't to get to. And John and I have a few friends in common actually, and so um, I never got a definitive no
Hmm.
from him, but I know that he had the opportunity to say yes a couple times, and I think was not particularly interested in talking.
Uh,
Um,
uh,
and I don't think there, and I to be clear, I don't think there's any real significance in that. Like, I don't think that John sort of weighed it and was like, "Oh, I don't think I want to talk." I think he's got way, way, way better things to do than to talk to me about my book.
okay. Um, can you give any details on the special pre-order package for the book?
I can't, largely because I don't know what they are.
Okay. That's kind of cool. That's
and
exciting, though. It's cool that there is going to be a pre-order package. I'm sure that will do very well.
Yeah, well, and that's certainly Bruce's kind of stock and trade. Largely, one of the things that's been great about working with Bruce is that he knows how to do what he does,
Uh-huh.
and and I know how to do what I do, and we've been um, very good about kind of giving the other guy his space. So even when he sent me his initial marketing plan, um, I was sort of bowled over, like, like there's stuff in there that I didn't know existed.
Uh,
Um, and I was like, I'm really glad that I'm on board with this guy because I would have no idea what any of this means.
yeah, Bruce just comes across as so smart and business savvy.
Mm.
Yes. The one thing that I think it was Bruce. He posted on the Pop Geek Heaven website is that the interviews were all recorded.
Yeah.
And I think there was something posted that the audio interviews would get sort of released at some point. Is that true? Or
I, now that you say it, I vaguely remember him saying that, and it was definitely something we had talked about.
yeah,
Um, I would say at this point it's slim to no. I'm again kind of pretty protective of um, the sort of sacredness of the interviews. I guess I mean like that sounds pompous
no,
maybe or
I
pretentious,
understand that. Yeah,
but that I really really have tried throughout the process to recognize that like anything anybody gives me, any minute of conversation or photograph or even picking up the phone is really a gift to this project, and I want to be really 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 sort of delicate in how I handle those gifts and sort of how I appreciate them. um, so and then I think kind of further, because of the nature of the book, because it has very few sort of direct quotes like that.
yeah,
I'd be leery, I think, of posting anything that might sort of skew uh, like the master narrative.
got you.
Uh,
Yeah,
so it's not out of the question, but I think pretty unlikely.
okay. And as a writer, is this your first major project, or did you write stuff beforehand?
I've written other stuff. It's certainly my first thing of this kind of scope. Um, but yeah, I wrote a children's book a few years back, and a sort of children's book parody, I guess,
Okay.
sometime after that. And then I've done a lot of anonymous freelance work.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but this is certainly the heaviest thing I've ever
Yeah. So I mean,
forced down on the world.
well, 7 years worth. I mean, that's. I can't imagine the satisfaction that you must be feeling. Now that it's been announced and
It,
that it's ready to come out.
it is very exciting. It's a real relief.
Yeah, the immediate
It,
feedback as well has just been incredible, hasn't it?
yeah, and that's been something I've really been looking forward to, because, like I said, I'm not quite over the finish line yet, um, and I've definitely had kind of moments of doubt in the middle of this whole thing, feeling like who nobody's going to care about this, or I don't know why I'm doing this, or I don't think I'm telling saying anything that anybody doesn't already know,
Uh-huh.
and so to be reminded that there are people who are just excited, and in a really supportive kind of positive way is great for me to see.
That's great.
Uh,
So, sorry.
I'm also just rewinding things. Part of the reason, a big part of the reason, I think I would also be reluctant to release the interviews is that there are times where, like, I don't think I would want anybody to hear what a dopey interviewer I can be.
Well, as long as you don't mind this interview, but
No. I mean, that
as in terms of asking questions,
yeah.
yeah, this is my fifth. This is going to be the first show, but this is the fifth interview that I've done. I think I've gotten slightly better at it. I do have the tendency to ramble, but it's always good when you have a subject matter that you can ramble on a longer time about. Okay, well, it's been great having you as the guest on the show. As we are chatting, the show still has about 3 or 4 working titles, which I'm going to have to come up make a decision on very quickly. So it's kind of a weird thing, by the time everyone hears this, it will have an actual title. So are there any sort of links or social media or anything like that you would like to share that people may not know about to promote
Uh,
the book and to promote yourself as well?
Not yet. My personal site, lousydrummer.com, is down right now for some retooling. And I, honestly am so kind of wrapped up in shepherding Brighter Day that I don't imagine Lousy Drum will be up anytime soon.
Uh-huh.
But I'm actually pretty excited about the Facebook page. It was really great last week before I left for LA to kind of throw up a quick post like I'm off to LA and to see, a couple hundred people see it and say like, great, this is great. This is exciting to hear.
Yeah.
So, my hope is that we can kind of keep a dialogue going there, at least for the next, through the next few months as the book hits and filters out into the world.
That's great. So, what is the name of the Facebook group again?
It's under Brighter Day, a Jellyfish story.
Okay, cool.
Which that's a funny thing because Bruce and I went back and forth about that a couple years ago, maybe, about whether it was going to be a Jellyfish story or the Jellyfish story.
Uh-huh.
And it was pretty important to me that it stay as a. I think there are obviously lots of small stories, and I think even lots of large stories. There are folks who are really interested in, I think I could have written a 200-page book on the gear that they used in recording.
Yeah.
And, and the compressors and the settings and, and just the engineering of those records. And there are people who would have loved to read that book and read that story. And it wasn't the story that I pursued.
Uh-huh.
So, I kind of want to make it clear that what I've got is just, the view from the part of ground that I chose to stand on.
So yeah, every fan would probably want to shake your hand and buy you a drink.
Well, that would be wonderful, and I hope so. I mean, I hope people really like it when it comes out, and it answers at least some of the questions and gets people, more excited about the band.
So I'm assuming the book will be full of sort of pictures as well, unseen.
Yeah, I got my hands on some good pictures that I'm pretty excited to get out there. Yeah, that's what I'll say there.
That's cool.
I mean, nothing outlandish, but
No.
but people, like I said, everybody has been so super cooperative and warm and helpful in this, and definitely that extends to their sort of willingness, wander into their homes and walk off with their family photo albums for an afternoon.
That's really cool, and I think that is probably the best thing that fans, including myself, can take away from this, is that everyone was cooperative and there was no sort of negativity or anything like that. And I think if it is the final chapter of Jellyfish, then I think it's a good way to sort of end.
Well, I hope so. I really I hope that I can. It's a great band with great fans, and I really would like to sort of do them both justice, or at least acceptableness.
I'm sure it goes far beyond that. So well, I just want to say thank you for being a guest and allowing me to ask the fanboy questions that I sort of wondered if
Sure.
you asked the band, because this, like I say, this podcast is an experiment for me, and having people such as yourself with a project to actually promote on my podcast, it gives the podcast some legitimacy as well. So I really appreciate that, and
Sure thing.
and I hope that that this is, you know, I kind of feel by proxy, you know, a part of the Jellyfish world, I suppose, in terms
Uh-huh.
of, you know, I mean, like I say, I've worked with band members as well, and you know, I've helped out with the with Ken Sharp's book that's coming out. So
Hmm.
it's just a really cool thing for me, and you know, we are both fans, so you know, it's just a cool thing, and you know, I want to thank you for coming on.
Sure. And thanks again for having me. And good luck with the podcast. And thanks for everything you do uh, in the internet, I guess, to keep jellyfish alive. So
Well, that's the thing. I think more people have found out about Jellyfish because of me, because I won't shut up about them.
I think so.
Thanks for being on, and I hope you get better soon as well.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, thanks.
Sure.